All right, GCSE crew, ready for a deep dive. This one's going to be massive. Literally, we're talking mega cities. You know it's a big deal for those exams,
Oh, absolutely. Megacities, they're vibrant, they're always growing, and facing a whole mountain of challenges.
which is exactly where your notes and revision guides come in. And that's where we come in too, to help you get through it all.
Yeah, we'll unpack what urbanization actually is, why it's happening, and what makes a city mega.
And we're not shying away from the not-so-fun stuff either, the problems mega cities face, like traffic jams, not enough housing, using Bristol and Rio as our examples.
And of course, it wouldn't be a deep dive without some thinking outside the box. We'll look at how these cities are trying to tackle those issues in a way that actually lasts, sustainably. And that's where you all come in.
Okay, so urbanization.
Yeah.
It's basically people moving from the countryside to towns and cities, right?
Right, but it's more than just numbers. It's a whole shift in how people live and work. Imagine going from farming in a tiny village to working in a factory in a bustling city. It's that kind of big change.
So why are people so drawn to these mega cities, especially in those developing countries? What's the big appeal?
Well, think of it like this. There are things pushing people away from those rural areas. Maybe not enough jobs, schools are too far, healthcare is a pain to get to. These are your push factors.
And then you have the city, right? All those bright lights, opportunities, better jobs, more schools, maybe even a chance to like reinvent your whole life. So
Yeah.
those are the pull factors.
Exactly, like being pulled in two different directions. Now, how this whole urbanization thing actually happens, it really depends on where you are in the world.
So urbanization looks different in, say, developed countries compared to developing countries.
Oh, absolutely. A developed country like the UK already has loads of people in cities, so the pace of change is slower. But in emerging economies, it's much faster, way more dramatic.
So places like Brazil are seeing their cities grow super fast.
Mm.
But when does a city actually become a megacity? What's the cutoff?
Well, we hit megacity status when the population hits 10 million. But it's not just about size. Think about it. They become these global centers for, well, everything. Finance, culture, innovation. It's like everything gets turned up, like way up.
Yeah, my notes say back in 1970, there were only 4 megacities in the whole world. By 2018, that jumped to 33.
Yeah.
And the Tokyo area is almost at 37.3 million people. Wild.
And don't forget about natural increase. That's just where births outnumber deaths, adding to the population even without people moving in.
So all this growth, it puts a massive strain on a city's resources, right? It's like trying to squeeze everyone into the school canteen at lunchtime.
Exactly. Trying to fit everyone in, and it causes all kinds of problems. Traffic jams, pollution, not enough housing.
Okay, let's talk about those problems then. What are some of the biggest headaches megacities have to deal with?
Well, imagine everything a city needs. Transport, housing, jobs, clean air, and water. All of that gets stretched thin when the population just explodes.
Oh, I can see that. Just thinking about getting to school in a packed city, the traffic is just nuts. All those cars, buses, lorries. Congestion's a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pollution from all those exhaust fumes.
Exactly. And it's not just cars either. Think noise pollution, air pollution, even light pollution at night. All of it takes a toll on people's health and how they live.
And then there's housing. Or, well, the lack of it. My textbook says when demand for housing is higher than the supply, the cost of living goes through the roof. It's got to be tough, right? All these people hoping for a better life, but then they can't even afford a decent place to live.
That's a crucial point. That's when you get these informal settlements, sometimes called slums, popping up. Areas where people build their own homes, often without basic things like running water or proper sanitation.
Which just makes those problems, the pollution, the bad sanitation, even worse. Plus, I read these informal settlements are often in areas that could flood or have landslides. It's a tough situation.
Yeah, it's a chain reaction of challenges. Sadly, this is the reality for a lot of megacities,
Yeah.
especially in developing countries.
Okay, so we've talked about megacities in general. Let's get specific. You brought 2 case studies, right? Bristol in the UK and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Why those 2?
Well, because they show us two really different perspectives on megacity life. Bristol gives us a glimpse into how a developed city tackles a growing population, while Rio shows us the challenges cities in developing countries face. Comparing them helps us get the whole complex picture.
So let's start with Bristol. What's important to know about it, in terms of its urban environment?
Well, Bristol's a major city in the southwest of England. It's not technically a megacity. It's got just under 500,000 people, but it's a really good example of how a developed city handles a growing population.
So even though Bristol isn't as big as, say, some of the mega cities in developing countries, it still has its own set of problems, right?
Absolutely. Based on the information you've gathered, some of Bristol's biggest problems include traffic congestion. As the city grows, more people are using cars, and the roads are getting more and more clogged.
Right. Anyone who's trying to get around Bristol during rush hour, the traffic can be a real nightmare.
It is. And it's not just an inconvenience, it's a major cause of air pollution, which makes it harder for people to get around efficiently and has a negative effect on the environment.
And yeah, all those cars pumping out exhaust fumes can't be good for the air quality in Bristol. So speaking of the environment, what about waste disposal? My notes say landfill space is becoming scarce.
That's a global problem, and Bristol is definitely feeling the pressure. They're working hard to reduce the amount of waste they produce and find alternatives to landfill.
So are they like encouraging people to recycle more and compost their food waste and stuff?
Exactly. They're pushing the whole reduce, reuse, recycle message. Plus, they're looking into high-tech solutions like waste-to-energy facilities.
What exactly is a waste to energy facility?
It's basically where they burn waste to create electricity. Now, it's not without its downsides, but it can be a way to keep waste out of landfills while also generating renewable energy.
So it's like getting something good out of something that would otherwise just be a problem.
Right. Okay, we talked about transport and waste. What about housing? I imagine that's a big issue even in Bristol, even if it's not as extreme as some developing countries.
Yeah, with the city growing and all, it has to be.
Definitely. As the population goes up and housing costs rise, being able to afford a place to live becomes a real worry for people in Bristol. City planners are constantly trying to find a balance between building enough homes and protecting green spaces.
Right. It's not just about putting up buildings. It's about creating places where people can actually, live good lives.
That's the key. It's about building communities, having good schools nearby, healthcare, job opportunities. It's all connected. Now, before we move on to Rio, it's worth pointing out that Bristol is putting a lot of effort into tackling these challenges.
It's good to hear. What are they doing to make the city more livable and, sustainable?
Well, they're investing a lot in public transport. Things like that rapid transit bus system we talked about and better infrastructure for cycling. And they're exploring all sorts of creative solutions for managing waste.
Sounds like they're really trying to cover all the bases, which is what's needed. Okay, so that gives us a good idea of what's happening in a developed city like Bristol. Now let's head south to Brazil. What's the story in Rio de Janeiro?
Rio's a city of contrasts. It's lively and exciting, but it also faces really unique challenges compared to Bristol. With over 12 million people, it's a mega city in every sense of the word. And all that rapid growth has put a huge strain on everything.
So Rio's challenges are more about dealing with that massive population than they are in Bristol.
In a lot of ways, yes. For instance, just providing enough housing for everyone in Rio is a massive undertaking. The demand for affordable places to live, it can't keep up with how fast the population's growing, which is a common problem in these rapidly developing cities.
And that's where the those informal settlements come in, right? The favelas, I think they're called. I remember reading about those.
Exactly. Favelas are, well, they're a stark reminder of Rio's housing crisis. They're usually built on the outskirts of the city on land that isn't really suitable for housing, and they often lack basic services.
Yeah, you can see how problems like pollution, crime, and disease would be much worse in those conditions.
Absolutely. And while there are efforts to improve life in the favelas, it's a really tough battle, especially with limited resources.
It seems like poverty plays a huge role in Rio's challenges, too, from what I've read.
You're right. Poverty forces many people in Rio, especially those living in favelas, into what we call the informal economy, which means jobs that are usually unstable, poorly paid, and offer very little protection. It kind of traps people in poverty, makes it really hard to break free.
It's like you need a job to escape poverty, but the only jobs available are the ones that keep you stuck there.
Exactly. That lack of stable income, it makes it even harder to access things like, healthcare, education. It's a whole web of problems, all connected.
And from our notes, we know Rio also has really high crime rates, right? Often linked to gangs and drug trafficking, especially in those favelas.
Right. Which, of course, creates fear and makes people feel unsafe, makes it harder to improve their lives and their communities.
So Rio's facing this, like perfect storm, right? Fast urbanization, a housing crisis, poverty, crime, and just not enough resources to deal with it all. It's a lot.
It is. But it's important to remember that Rio isn't the only one. These problems are happening in megacities all across the developing world.
Yeah. It's heavy stuff. But it's important to understand these issues, especially for all you GCSE students out there. This is key stuff. We've covered a lot, but there's still more to explore.
Right. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into specific examples of how these challenges play out in both Bristol and Rio. Back again for more on megacities.